Good to see you again. Let's look at the next page, page 8, the supplementary materials. Supplementary materials are intended to provide additional language experience or instruction to the students. So many series books, course books, involve some kind of supplementary materials, which usually are called workbooks. So many series of supplementary readers were published and used in primary and secondary schools in China in the period 1920 to 1949. And this is the same, or this is true of many ESL countries as well. That extensive readers were popular as supplementary materials in UK language schools in 1970s. As you know, in 1970s, communicative language teaching approach was also very popular, and it just began to start in UK and the surrounding countries. At the time, the course books or the readers produced their supplementary materials as well. There's many mainstream publishers developed their own series with graded readers. And then in the 1980s, the separate skills books became popular. So this means that providing some books focusing on reading, writing, listening, and speaking, sometimes vocabulary and grammar. For example, the book title Speak Out, written by Parsons and Williams, is a source book, a resource book, teacher's resource book, is accompanied by a teacher's resource book. So the book has detailed teaching notes and an extensive bank of photocopyable activities covering grammar, vocabulary, and functional language in communicative contexts, and mid-course and end-of-course tests as well. As I said before, in 1970, the CLT, the Communicative Language Teaching, began. So the course books produced at the time also tried to incorporate communicative activities and some different kind of photos or some pictures to get students' interest. Another example books are Active Teaching and My Speak Out Lab. You can search it through on the internet. More and more add-ons are being made available free to coursebook users via the internet. For example, Hathaway Intermediate. This means that if you search for the books on the internet, clicking on some sites, I mean the publisher's site, you can download or sometimes you can refer to some resource books or workbooks that support learning activities of these books. So sometimes the teachers can use the workbooks during their lecture time, but sometimes as they are just workbooks, sometimes the teachers can give some small assignments to the students for their review on what they have learned in the classroom. Next one, CLIL and TBLT, TPR. These words are very commonly used in the field of English language teaching. CLIL means content and language integrated learning. Sometimes, this is called just a content-based language learning, CBI or CBL. And TBLT is task-based language teaching. These have made a big impact recently in books about methodology. Actually, many course books for university students or adult learners, sometimes for teenagers, are based on the content or themed. So usually they are called just theme-based, not content-based, but they are similar. To distinguish the concept of the content-based and the theme-based are very vague. So sometimes the two concepts are just exchangeably used. Task-based language teaching is one of the specification of CLT. So around for about 20 years, yeah, TBLT has become very popular approach for the realization of CLT. So the principles of TBLT have been researched and applied a lot in the area of ELT and ELT research areas. TPR is total physical response, has rarely been implemented in supplementary materials for students, but it can be best realized in teachers' research books. The writer of this chapter, I mean the Tomlinson, yeah, Brian Tomlinson, very support the usefulness of the TPR, but he several times mentions that TPR is not actively applied in books for the students, especially for young learners. The TPR is, I think it's used very well and sometimes very easily in language academy, sometimes not in the state schools classroom, but instead in a private academy, which constitutes just small number of students, because TPR requires the students express their understanding of the teacher's instruction through their body language or the body positions or the postures. So sometimes TPR can make the atmosphere, the classroom atmosphere, very dynamic and interesting and vivid, but in some cases, in the classes of state schools, the teachers may not favor making their classroom too much fussy or sometimes crowded. So using TPR could be very easily applied in private institute, but also I think teachers can easily apply for teaching very young students below the elementary levels or the early level of the elementary school students. Of course, I think that the early teenagers also favor TPR. Sometimes TPR can involve some very free or comfortable environment for learning English language. So this is very one of the convenient and effective methods for teaching young learners. And students who made progress in an intermediate level class were those who sought out English outside the classroom through interaction with other students, with local people, and or read English newspapers, magazines, and books from the library. This means that activating and facilitating English language learners' English language competencies and their exercising of English language or what they have learned requires them to use or apply what they have learned in the actual context, in their real life context. So sometimes teachers can provide some opportunities for their students to use what they have learned in the classroom by providing some small assignments or sometimes just letting them know about different opportunities or places or some activities that they can do at home or with their friends. All right, let's look at the next page. Self-access materials. The concept of self-access materials was not clear at the beginning. At the time, I just read through the article. So self-access from whom? I mean, from teachers or from students. The self-access material means the self-access from students. So this concept means that resources designed for learners to use independently, allowing them to control their own learning pace, content, and process. So self-access materials is very, very broad concepts. The materials, any materials that can activate students' autonomous language learning can just mean self-access materials. The most effective way of quickly gaining basic communicative competence seems to be immersion in the target language, that is moving to a country where the language is spoken, or joining a community of language speakers. So the self-access material does not only mean using some books or papers or course books. The material is very, very broad concept. So try to just visit some native countries. I mean, English language learners can visit English speaking countries, UK or USA. Or sometimes in your cases, you are the overseas learners who are to learn some Koreans and English as well. In such a case, you just visited Korea and you are taking these courses for your development of Korean and English, and specifically English language teaching skills as well. Such a choice or such a decision for your experiences of learning here is one of the way of your getting self-access materials. Brian Tomlin says it is very, very effective way of getting effective self-access materials, especially for the enhancement of the communicative competence. So such an experience can mean immersion. Immersion involves studying subjects in L2. L1 is a mother tongue, and L2 means the target language for the Korean learners or the learners of the EFL. The L2 means usually English. So in this context, you can regard L2 as English. So immersion involves studying subjects in L2. So learning English in English, or sometimes learning Korean in Korean, is a potentially successful way of gaining communicative competence in L2 because of the massive exposure to relevant input and multiple opportunities for using the target language. I think you are one of the person who just feel that immersion helps your improvement of English or the Korean language. As one of the overseas learners, I started my master's in Australia, and for the PhD in UK, I think I was also just got significant merit by my experience with immersion learning in the target language context. Students make rapid progress in developing fluency. Yes. In such a context of overseas learning, the people who you met every day cannot modify some language errors that you make, but every day you can improve your fluency by just maximizing your exposure to the relevant input and your experience facing the situations that require your output. So you can improve fluency, but the persons, your friends or your teachers may not modify every error you make. So, see the next paragraph. Language errors start to fossilize. Sometimes by repeating some mistakes or language errors every day, we can fossilize our error. In this sense, some language teachers need to figure out what their students frequently making mistakes. I mean, the mistakes frequently made by them, and sometimes as explicate and explicitly let them know what their language errors are. So the language teacher sometimes can write down some common errors that his students make on the blackboard or PowerPoint materials and modify explicitly by explaining or adding some grammatical rules. Students continue to make basic grammatical errors until language awareness classes were added. This is what I mean. Language awareness classes mean that the classes where the teachers can explicitly explain what their students' errors are and what they should use for the correct expressions. Let's look at the next paragraph. Many self-access materials do not include enough exposure to authentic language news, enough opportunities for communication, enough experience in making discoveries from authentic encounters with the language, or enough materials designed to engage students effectively and cognitively. I think in this sentence, the self-access materials mean some course books. Many of the course books focus on the form-focused self-access materials. So such a course books usually do not consider the students' engagement by their affective and cognitive endeavors. But I think maybe the course books require students' deep cognitive involvement, or sometimes their activities or behavior. I mean, like in the audio visual ALM, audio visual language learning, or audio language learning, audio lingual method. Audio lingual method. Such a method is based on the behaviorism. Behaviorism means that students can learn by repeating some expressions or activities. So based on the mechanical processes of repetition, students can improve their speaking or listening skills in English. So in such cases, students cannot engage in any communicative activity, especially by their affective considerations. I think partially, such an activity based on ALM requires students' cognitive involvement, but mostly they do not require students' uh, higher order thinking. So mostly they just are based on some repetition or drills, the simple repetition drills. So Brian Tomlinson says, many course books need to consider the students' affective and cognitive involvement. Actually, realization of such a especially affective consideration the students is not that much easy. But I think the first one the materials writers can do is try to involve some activities that consider students' interest and their concern or their comfort environment. I mean, not that much difficult activities not using too much activities that require too much cognitive engagement, but instead some activities that trigger students' motivation and interest and their desire to learn new language, which means activation of effective engagement of the students' learners. For example, Discover English, written by Bolitho and Tomlinson. It is an activity book intended to help higher level students to make their own discoveries about how English is used. It focuses on sentence level grammar. So this means that this book uh, relatively consider some students' cognitive engagement more than other course books. And at the same time, they also consider some sentence level grammar. I'm not sure this book involves some effective considerations. So this is the same, the core principles for a good self-access material are if the course books or if the materials involve affective and cognitive activities or considerations for the language learners. Let's look at the next one. Factors specific to the student's context to be used for developing the criteria. This means that by considering these specific factors, the self-access materials will be more effective and appropriately designed. So the materials should consider the learner's age, gender, levels, purpose for learning the language, sometimes amount of class learning time, estimated time available for self-access, previous experience of using self-access materials, attitudes to self-access, learning style preferences, learner needs, learner wants. Exposure to the language in use, opportunity to use the language, and experience making self-discoveries are also can be good criteria to select good self-access materials. Let's look at the publications about materials development. In 1970s and 1980s, there were very few publications on material development. So the phrase materials development was not used at the time. But in the mid-1990s, four dedicated books on material development appeared in Tomlinson 1998. There were chapters on data collection, the process of evaluation, materials writing, materials publication, and theory into practice. So after the 1990s, the material development area started to emerge as an area of language teaching or language learning. Matsuda, we just call it Matsuda Materials Development Association. Matsuda Journal, the name is Folio. You can search for the folio by entering into this website, Matsuda. They are still working well. The folio, maybe the latest folio has been also published. So if you are very interested in the recent material development, empirical studies, or some teaching and learning theories, or some different cases, you can refer to folio. In the 1990s, books on language teaching methodology gave more attention to application of methodology to MD, and in 2001, Richards published the book of curriculum development. And McGrath was the first book to provide systematic applications of a theory to the practice of evaluating, adapting, and supplementing materials. and offer principled suggestions. Then from 2006 to 2016, publications on MD have focused much on the publication of theory to aspects of MD practice. In 2010, more Harwood includes a genre-based approach for teaching writing and content-based approach for teaching reading skills. Genre-based approach is very famous, especially for teaching writing. It is the approach that provides students the when teachers teach how to write email in the business situation, in that case, the teacher can read through an example of the email for the business with their students. And then the teacher and the students together analyze the structures or some expressions or words of the email, and then they try to create their own email based on their analysis of the example. So especially genre-based approach can be effectively used for teaching writing and teaching the course in ESP, English for Specific Purposes language course. And in 2010, Thomas and Masuhara facilitated language acquisition through extensive reading process, and discovery approaches to develop writing skills, process drama approaches, and the use of problem-solving approaches. In 2011, Tomlinson provided chapters for visualization, flex materials, suggestopedia, and humanist approaches. He also, in 2013, includes chapters on blended learning, digital materials, corpus-informed materials. And 2014, other writers connect theory to practice. And 2015, Michon and Timis provided practical instruction to the principles of MD. Dr. Timis is my supervisor when I was doing my PhD in UK University. So this is a simple and very, very effective brief of the development of the material development areas. You can read through here by yourself. And let's look at the next one. Should develop the materials. Most commercial materials are written by professional materials writers, writing to a brief determined by the publishers from an analysis of the market needs. It means that mostly the publishers set the guideline for publishing new course books. Then the material writers try to follow what their publishers just order to them. And sometimes they also have some negotiation what to include and what to exclude. These writers are usually experienced and competent. They are familiar with the realities of publishing, and they write full-time for a living. But sometimes some writers write the course books, and sometimes they also teach in the universities as well. The books they write are usually systematic, well-designed, teacher-friendly, and thorough, but they often lack energy and imagination. I think partly I agree with them because I just bought several kinds of course books for language conversations or simple language teachings, or for teaching general English for university students, or sometimes for teenagers. Many of the books have some very, very similar structures and contents, some grammatical or vocabulary learning materials. So I think sometimes the book writers need some more imagination. Teachers throughout the world only need a little training, experience, support to become materials writer who can produce imaginative materials of relevance and appeal to their students. So I also agree with this. You guys, you are just studying Tesol in this university, and you are also taking the professional courses to become a good language writer or sometimes to be a good language teacher as well. So I believe you can also become very good, very effective material writers for your students, sometimes by accumulating more different experiences in teaching and sometimes in writing. You also can develop your own materials or some course books. And also, if you have some good chance, you can publish your own ideas. How should the materials be developed? Typically, commercial materials have been written over a long period of time by a pair or very small team of writers. The Tomlinson's preference is for a large team approach to writing materials, which aim at fast first draft production by many people working together, followed by refinement by a small group of experts. So the teachers inspire each other working together with their ideas, and they maintain creative energy and also relate their materials to the actual learners. And they can also suggest use for improvement to each other's materials. So working together and teachers' cooperation is very important in developing linked learning materials and sometimes developing some assessment or test materials as well. Right, this is the last one. What are the positive trends? I don't think this is positive. This can just be the trends in material development. The first one in the 2013, there were some materials requiring investment by the students in order for them to make discoveries for themselves from analysis of samples of language in use. The course books asked the students to find the predetermined answers, and this is still true today. It's been around 10 years, as it says, that the course books require students make discoveries by themselves to find out, to figure out the answers. But I think the predetermined answers does not seem to require students deep level of thinking. I mean, the higher order thinking, like inferences or integration or synthesis. So many of the course books just require students predetermined answers, means that the books are not much based on the principles of a communicative language teaching approach. There are more materials making use of corporate data reflecting actual language use. Corpus data these days it's been around 15 to 10 years that the corpus language learning or corpus approach has become very, very popular in the area of ELT. Corpus or vocabularies or lexis are the foundation of a teaching or learning of the new language. So many researchers or teachers can collect new language use by searching through the internet. So the corpus, searching for the corpus sometimes revealed what the native language speakers daily use in their life. So providing some corpus data to our students can help them use the real life language or very natural expressions. for their natural language communications. But there are still many coursebooks which deliberately do not make any use of corpora at all. Therefore, some coursebooks just provide a very unnatural or not authentic expressions that the sound is sometimes not natural to the native speakers. Korean English language textbooks mandated by the Korean state as well. They also sometimes provide a very unnatural expressions. There are more extensive reader series being produced with fewer linguistic constraints and more provocative content. Publishers began to add a comprehension question to their extensive readers, this ironically promoting intensive reading. Recently, the publishers tried to add more comprehension questions to their extensive readers. This means that they try to just motivate their readers, their students, to read more materials than the course book, any other than the course book, I mean. But the comprehension questions sometimes try to lead their students just to focus on the given text materials. So the students can sometimes very focus on the linguistic or vocabulary part rather than focusing on the language content or more extensive reading. So providing these kind of questions, ironically promoting rather intensive reading. These are the simple concepts of extensive reading and intensive reading. Extensive reading is reading at length for enjoyment or information without worrying about not understanding every word. But intensive reading is reading with careful attention in order to understand everything in the text. Of course, in extensive reading and intensive reading, the both of them are very useful and important when we teach young language learners. But as you know, the young language learners' cognitive development is different from that of the adult learners or the teenagers. So teaching every grammatical or structural knowledge to the young learners may demotivate them to learn a new language or to read something written in L2. So sometimes motivating the young learners extensive reading can also very effective to lead them to read autonomously, read some English books. So as I just read it here, providing comprehension questions to the students by the course books may demotivate the students' extensive reading by having them just focus on some given text materials for their extensive reading to find out some predetermined answers to the comprehension questions. There has been an increased attempt to personalize the reading process by getting students to relate the topics and text to their own lives, views, and feelings. This is very important to facilitate the students' interest and motivation in language learning, especially for very young learners and the teenagers as well. There is an increase in attempt to stimulate effective engagement by involving students in tasks which encourage the expression of their feelings. These kinds of activities can stimulate or the activation of the communicative language teaching because expression of feeling could be very different among the students, and This means that the questions or the activities do not require predetermined answers. And there is also an increasing use of the internet as a source of current, relevant, appealing texts. I think these days, many materials require the student use of the mobile. By using their camera to scan the QR code, they can listen to some MP3 materials, or sometimes listen to some songs, or sometimes watch some short video. There is evidence of movement away from spoken practice written grammar and towards experience of spoken grammar in use. So having the young learners experience some spoken grammar in use can helps them not too much focus on the language structure or grammatical attributes, but just experiencing some spoken grammar in use, have them naturally use and learn some new grammar. They may not recognize what they learn as a grammar, but they just simply use and repeatedly using them. They may feel that how they use the expressions or how they understand the expressions. There is a considerable increase in the number of ministries and institutes which have decided to produce their own locally relevant materials. And lastly, there is a greater diversity and inclusion. The most course book nowadays, including people from many different cultures and ethnic groups. Around 20 or 10 years ago, many course books involved some language speaker examples. The white language speakers or the language speakers from UK or USA. But these days, many course books involve many people from Asia or some Africa or some East Asian as well. So the course books reflect the cultural diversity, and they try to erase or reduce some stereotype or some misunderstanding of the native speaker concept, or who native speakers of the English are. The East Asians or sometimes the African Americans also can become native English speakers. All right, good. Next time in our classes, we will learn about materials evaluation. Just enjoy your holiday tonight. See you next week.